A regular guest on the show is Jonathan Ayling from the Free Speech Union. And, mostly we talk about free speech. There's been some interesting things happening in that space in recent weeks and in recent years, but not talking to Jonathan Ayling, but he's the topic of the next conversation. Maryanne Spurdle from the Maxim Insitute joins us. Maryanne, kia ora. Good morning. Thanks for your time today. Hey, when it comes to free speech, I mean, Free Speech Union do some amazing work in this space, but they don't have a monopoly on it. I suppose that's the nature of free speech. Everybody else gets to talk about it as well. And this is something that you've focused on in an article which I understand is going to be posted on the Maxim website towards the end of the week. And this is something I've spoken with Jonathan about, a bit of a deliciously ironic situation for the Free Speech Union. My understanding, they were banned from a debate about free speech at Victoria University. Doesn't get any weirder, does it?
No, the fact that the other thing that I found weird was that one of the students who was objecting to him being on the panel was actually one of the editors at the student magazine. And coming from, student newspapers, I'm like, that's your job is to encourage free speech. You in the media should not want free speech stifled. And that's where a lot of the complaints were coming from.
Although, to be fair, ever since the printing press, I blame Gutenberg, pamphleteers have abounded and universities are where they tend to gather people with a certain political point of view that want to get their view out there in opposition to all others. And it has got a little bit like that, even in the area of free speech. There is the truth, and then there's the enemy that must be attacked. It's got pretty vicious recently.
Yeah, the way they rejigged that event, because it is going ahead, I think, in a week or so. But I noticed that I think the lineup is the same. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Jonathan is included. But they're having the panel interviewed, and then they're having a discussion of academics following on from it, which sounds like they're keeping it very safe.
Yeah.
It's not going to actually be a debate. That might be taking it too far.
And there is perhaps a tendency, even within this space, for people who have strong political opinions to say, well, I'm not going to be on the panel if that person's going to be on the panel. So you've got these individual pockets of opinion popping up in real life or in social media. You've got these echo chambers, and they're saying, well, I'm not going to listen to somebody who has a contrary point of view than mine. That's hateful. I mean, this is a brave new world in which we live, and it's quite new, this way of looking at free speech and truth and public discourse. This is a relatively new thing.
Have you come across the book, The Coddling of the American Mind?
No.
It's maybe about 5 years old now. It's excellent because they focus especially on university campuses, mainly in the States. But from pretty much 2015 on, they recognize that there's this shift. And it also is wrapped up in safetyism. So along with keeping the youth safe, you keep them safe from anything that might offend or upset them.
Yep.
And so they're tracking kind of this generation of kids who just don't know how to be disagreed with. And if you disagree with someone else, well, you leave them to their opinions. You don't get curious and say, why do you think that? And have a conversation about what you might disagree on and come to some kind of understanding of each other. You just protect yourself from anything that might challenge your already held understanding of how the world is. And it's not the best way to get to truth. And it's also not the best way to be resilient. And so, according to them, from about 2015, there's been a shift.
And I suppose the temperature's gone up when it comes to discussion. If there is somebody that you disagree with, then they get called all sorts of names and, cancel culture and that type of thing as well. And one of the things that does concern me about this is, circling back again a few years, although still very much the case today, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, if anybody was safe, if anybody was a treasured cultural icon of a particular generation, you'd think, gosh, she has got the relational credit to be able to speak truth into the lives of people. Turns out not. And there's a very interesting podcast that you put me onto, actually, the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. Really interesting to unpack some of the causal factors behind exactly what went down there.
Yeah. And one of the extra fascinating things about that podcast is the woman doing it actually used to be a member of Westboro Baptist Church, if you
Yeah.
can call them Baptist. They're a cult in the States.
Yeah, exactly.
Baptist.
I think that,
And
yeah. No,
yeah, so she grew up in that church. She was a member of it. And so she was alive at a time in her youth when people in her circles literally burned J.K. Rowling's books.
Yep.
And, she was promoting witchcraft, blah, blah, blah. And here she is 15, 20 years later, and she recognizes, fortunately, what was wrong with what that cult was about, basically shouting people down and condemning them and not listening to people. So she's become an excellent listener, an excellent self-reflector. And now she's seeing J.K. Rowling treated the way that her group treated her, but by people from a completely different tribe.
Yeah.
That fascinated her. She's interviewed J.K. Rowling and the people, many of the people who are vocally opposed to her. And it's just so insightful to see that behavior is not limited to cults and crazies. There are people who are claiming to be inclusive and claiming to be loving, who are treating people like J.K. Rowling that way simply because they disagree with each other, not finding out why she's saying what she's saying.
Yeah. And actually, when it comes to free speech, that does apply to people that we disagree with, and that's the actual point of it. Although, interesting thing I found from the podcast, because it's easy to sort of curiously look at this social phenomenon which is happening in terms of cancelling and people raising the temperature in terms of argument. However, the Westboro Baptist example is perhaps an example of the church doing that same thing. Easy to point the finger and go, gosh, these people are terrible. Look at them, they're cancelling everybody. They're saying that these people shouldn't have a place in civil society. How dare they do that? But it's not that long ago in the history of the church. And yes, different denominations responded differently. But for us as a church community, for us as the body of Christ, there's a bit of truth to be told there, perhaps.
Yeah. And it really doesn't matter if you're secular or religious. The principle that we should be listening to what other, respecting people enough to listen to why they believe, what they think is true. And being resilient enough to, if somebody disagrees with what you believe, take it. Instead of having to shout someone down or cancel them. And I mean, the protests about Israel and Palestine kind of sum that up as well. It's a very complicated situation. Instead of dealing with the complexity and recognizing that, human rights works both ways and that we should be grieving for any lives lost, it becomes this, either or. You're either with us or you're against us. The complexity isn't recognized. And the way we'll get a point across is just by being loud. We're not going to listen. We're just going to be loud. And nobody is going to come to any understanding of each other that way.
The other area where people have heated debate is in the area of the environment, in particular climate change. Lots of activists, particularly amongst a younger generation, but of course not limited to that. Some interesting comments from former Green Party leader James Shaw, and you get to a certain stage in your political career where you think, you know what, I don't need to bite my tongue anymore. What have I got to lose? And, valedictory speeches, for example, can be very eye-opening in that regard. Somebody who has, very much... literally nailed their colours to the mast in terms of environmental concern. Some interesting things he said about free speech recently.
Yeah, it was really encouraging. What did he say specifically? He talks about real negative personality-based politics where people try and undermine each other as people rather than focus on policy positions and argue about how we want to be as a country. So he recognized we need a vision. We need to talk about the issues and look at the facts. I disagree with a lot of his policy positions, but I respect the fact that he was willing to listen and work with people. And that's just becoming rarer and rarer. And he's called that out. And I thought that was brilliant of him to recognize that we should not be treating people, whatever you believe, I'm going to treat you badly if you don't agree with me, and you're my ally if you do. It's about more than that.
And hey, swimming against the tide in that regard, and hey, not to put too fine a point on it, somebody should tell Chloe, new co-leader of the Green Party, who has very much gone out on a limb, not just on issues of the environment, but also on Palestine and trans rights and all of those sorts of things. Very, very binary, ironically. You're in or you're out. It's black or white. And yeah, made some pretty strong public statements on all of those issues in her career.
Yeah, it becomes tribal. And I think in politics and out of it, it's the people who are able to develop good friendships and good relationships with people who they have fundamental disagreements with, who you end up respecting, because, we should be treating people for who they are as people, not for what their opinions are about things.
Exactly. Hey, thanks for adding to the dialogue and so robust conversation on this. As mentioned, the article will be on the Maxim website by the end of the week. Good conversations, Maryanne. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.